Hey, what's going on everybody? Caleb here, and today we're going to be talking about what it takes to learn to code in 2019. Now, we're going to break this video up into two parts. So the first part is going to be more like your mindset and your approach, what tactics you need to use. And then the second part is what to actually focus on learning. So what are the technical things you need to go study? Now, obviously this is not going to be a tutorial, so we're not going to go over how to code this or how to do this algorithm or any of that kind of stuff. This is going to point you in the right direction, and I'm going to give you lots of resources on where you can go take that next step. So hopefully this video is nice and helpful for you guys. If you have any other suggestions for people learning to code, or if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. But first, don't forget to check out our sponsor, MailerLite. MailerLite is an email service provider, and what this means is you can use it to send a newsletter out to anyone who would want to join your newsletter. This is ideal for those who have a small business, are an entrepreneur, or are hoping to share their coding experience with others. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, we're going to get into that a lot in this video, but one of the best ways to learn to code is actually to share your knowledge with other people, whether that's through a blog, a YouTube channel, or a newsletter. It's a great way to share your knowledge and grow your skills. So I would recommend checking out MailerLite if you want to start a weekly or monthly or however long newsletter where people can come and learn from you new techniques for coding. And also, if you can tell, I apologize now. I'm a bit nasally today. My wife says it's a cold. I think it's Ebola. I'm not entirely sure, but I apologize if my voice is driving you crazy. Hopefully in the next video I'll feel a little bit better. But definitely wanted to get a video out today, so I couldn't wait. So, learning to code. Well, this is an interesting thing, especially nowadays, because so many people are learning to code and so many more jobs are requiring people to know how to code. So, do you have to learn to code to survive in this world? I wouldn't say we're quite there yet, but it's definitely an important skill. This is comparable to maybe learning to drive when cars were becoming mainstream, like in the 12th century or... I'm kidding. A lot of people feel that learning to code means that they have to be a software developer or an engineer or a web developer. That's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of jobs out there that will benefit from you knowing how to code, and some of them it might even be a requirement. So for example, technical marketing. If you want to go into some kind of product management role, for example, you're going to define the vision of some product and what's to be developed and what's not going to be developed. It can be super beneficial if you know how to code. So product marketing, product management, those two things are going to benefit from coding. Another example is technical sales, where you're not necessarily a software engineer, but knowing how to code will help you know the code base. And I'm getting assaulted right now. And coding is especially beneficial if you are in some kind of role and you are seeking promotion. Often, having an extra skill that other people do not have will help you set yourself apart from these people and get a promotion. So those are just some examples of what coding can do to help you beyond just being a software engineer. Coding will also come in handy if you're wanting to start your own business. So whether it's a technical product, maybe you want to create an application, or maybe you're just an individual owner like me trying to start this business, starting a YouTube channel, creating your own website. Knowing how to code is going to make your life tremendously easier, and you're going to be able to save a lot of money not having to outsource everything to other people. Another benefit of learning to code is that you can do coding as a side gig. So if you have a career you love but you want to supplement your income, for example, well, you can put up job offers on Upwork. You can do some coding on the side. It's a great way to get some extra cash because the pay is very good. And lastly, if you want to change careers, maybe you're in a career, you're tired of it, you want to get into something new, well, coding is a very easy skill to pick up on your own. You don't have to go to college to succeed at it. You don't have to go to a boot camp. We'll talk a little bit more about those options later, but you can pick it up on your own. Just go on the internet, learn how to code, and you can switch careers by switching into a software testing role or a software development role and start your career from there. So lots of opportunities, whether you want a promotion, want to start your own business, want a side gig, or you just want to change your career altogether. Coding is basically a key ingredient to all of those things. So I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're probably already convinced that learning to code is an important thing to do. So maybe that was all useless information, but now that we got that under our belts, we can talk about how to learn how to code. So learning to code is more about mindset than actually the way you learn code. There are a ton of different ways to learn code, whether it's books, courses, platforms, school, whatever option you choose. The number one thing that's going to make you succeed is your mindset about how you learn to code and what you're trying to produce. Large part of that is having a goal. right? Going back to those things we talked about, getting a promotion or starting a business. When you know why you're learning to code, it's much easier to motivate yourself to stick it through all the challenging parts of it. And it is challenging, I'm not gonna lie. Learning to code is a very challenging process. Now, I'm going to argue that pretty much anybody can learn to code, so I'm not saying you have to be a certain way in order to succeed at coding, but I'm going to describe the ideal individual who might have a better chance of succeeding at learning to code. So generally, people that are successful at learning to code are go-getters. They have a high level of drive. They want to learn, they're excited about building new projects, they're excited to tinker with the technology, and overall, they're very ambitious. Why exactly? Because nobody's going to force you to learn this stuff. You can go through a 4-year computer science program and come out knowing absolutely nothing. Or you can study yourself online and learn a ton. It's all about the person learning the stuff and not necessarily the stuff that's being taught. And there's some terrible screeching noise in the background. You mind? Coding is going to be my golly. When you code, there are going to be a ton of failures, and it's really important how you perceive these. One of my favorite people is Thomas Edison, who said, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And that's kind of the mindset you need to have when it comes to coding, right? Because you're gonna have all these bugs, code's not gonna compile, it's not gonna work. And if you're just like, oh, it's not working, I quit, I'm done, you're not gonna succeed. So it's really important that you don't look at these as failures, but rather that it just doesn't work and you have to try something else. So that's the mindset. Now when it comes to how you spend your time, do you read books? Do you go to school? Do you do this? Do you do that? There's so many different options, and I'm gonna argue that that is less important. It's more important that you're doing something. And just to put this into perspective, if you just spend 1 hour a day for an entire year, that's 365 hours that you can spend studying how to code, practicing how to code. That's 365 hours, which is about 9 or 10 40-hour work weeks of time. So imagine if you were thrown into a software development job and you worked there for 9 or 10 weeks. Everything you learned in that time frame could also be done just an hour a day over the course of a year. It's not a race, it's more about consistency and practice. So don't feel like you have to learn everything by the weekend or by this upcoming month or in 2 weeks or whatever the goal is. Slow down and realize that this is going to be a long process and be more consistent than obsessed. The most important thing is to just do a little bit every day and you will make progress. Now when it comes to having some level of success, there's a lot of different things that can measure that. So you can have a degree, which is kind of like this instant validation, like, oh, this guy went through this program. Or you could have some certificate, you went through a coding boot camp, or, oh, you finished this Udemy course. But I would argue that the number one way to basically validate your knowledge is to have a portfolio, which is basically a collection of projects that you've worked on, that you coded yourself, and that a potential employer or customer, if you're selling software, would be able to look at this portfolio and see your work. So GitHub, that's helpful. Building up a portfolio on your own website, that's helpful, which by the way, if you guys want to build a website, check out Bluehost. I'll leave a link for you guys in the description for that. That is a hosting company that I would recommend, and if you sign up, I get a kickback, so yeah, do that. When you have a portfolio, it basically shows what you can do, and I can tell you guys right now that the industry of software development and coding and software engineering and technology is extremely results driven. So if you want to, for example, you want to be a self-employed software developer and you want to put some projects up on Upwork and say that you're available for 75 bucks an hour, for example. Well, the people that are going to hire you are not going to care about your degree or your certificates. They're going to want to know what you accomplished and how much you charge. So what am I saying by that is you need to have a portfolio. The other things are not going to hurt you. Some people care about those, so typically larger companies are going to be more interested in a degree or going through a boot camp. So it all depends on what your goals are, but the number one thing that's going to set you apart from the rest of people learning how to code is having a portfolio and some way to validate your knowledge. Personally, for me, that's my YouTube channel here. I create tutorials on the things I know. people can come here and know immediately if I know something about Java or whatever it is. One of the huge benefits around the fact that the software industry is very results oriented is it allows you to charge a lot. So whereas other professions, people tend to think of amount per hour, with software development, especially if you're a self-employed software developer, you can start thinking project-based. So this project, which might take someone 100 hours, I can get it done in 10 and charge what would normally be a 100-hour rate. So with software development, you're able to charge a lot of money. So because of this, people on Upwork are charging $100, $150 an hour. And this can really add up if you're trying to supplement your income or even replace your job doing software development. It's less about how much you know and more about what you know. So if you can refine your knowledge to a very valuable skill, then boom, you can make some cash. So this brings the ultimate question of where to start. There's so many different paths and there's no golden path that's going to make you successful. Different people learn in different ways, and embrace that. Figure out what works best with you and go for it. But I'm going to give you some recommended suggestions that you can try out and see how they work for you. First thing, I'm a YouTuber here. I create tutorials on different programming languages. So obviously I'm going to recommend my videos because they're pretty sweet. So I have a couple different programming language series that I would recommend you start with. So if you are interested in C, C++, Java, C#, or JavaScript. Sorry, I almost forgot. So if you were interested in any of those languages, I have series on those languages. You can start learning coding from scratch using any of those series. So I'll leave a link for you guys to those in the description, and that's my recommended path. That'll give you everything you need to know to get started, and it will take you through all of the steps to basically learn pretty big section of a programming language. So that is what I would recommend, but there are some other suggestions that I'm going to offer to you guys if those don't tickle your fancy. You could try Free Code Camp, which is a free platform you can go learn to code. I have talked with the founder of this, Quincy Larson, and he is a great guy. The content there has helped tons of people learn to code and get jobs in the industry. So I'd highly recommend Free Code Camp if my YouTube videos are subpar to your standards. Now you could also check out a boot camp. And the way a boot camp works is it's going to give you everything you need to know to succeed in the industry. So it's kind of like drinking from the fire hose, getting it all down really quick. Now I'm going to mention Dev Mountain. Dev Mountain has sponsored some of my other videos, but this is not a sponsored video, just for full disclosure. But they have said if I send people their way, they'll give them $250 off. So this might be a good route for you guys. The downsides of a boot camp is that it's very, very time heavy. So you're gonna have to spend a lot of time at this boot camp, a lot of time practice, and it's very intense. So with Dev Mountain, for example, it's 13 weeks of drinking from the fire hose and learning everything you can so you can go succeed at a job in the industry. So I will leave a link for Dev Mountain for you guys in the description, but there are a ton of boot camps out there. Some of them are in person, some of them are online. Dev Mountain, in fact, is both. So depends on what you guys want for that. I personally would recommend trying to go to something in person if you're going to do a boot camp. It's very motivating having to go in person and learn how to code. Now let's talk about the question that rules them all. Should you go to college or university for computer science or software engineering or software development or whatever? And the answer is, it depends, which I hate that answer, but basically, college is very expensive and I don't feel like people really think about what they're paying for it. And it takes a really long time. So we're talking usually a 4-year degree. In 4 years, you can learn a lot of information, but generally when you go through university, you're gonna have to learn a lot of stuff that's not going to help you in the job. For some people, that's fine. But personally, I would really only recommend that route. Maybe if you're in high school or really fresh out of high school and you're looking for a career, you have that time, you might have the flexibility to go to a university and take some classes. That might be a good route for you. If you're already in the industry, maybe you're in your 30s or you're later on in your career, taking 4 years and going to a university to go study calculus and physics and English and all of these unrelated things, that's going to be a lot of time that would be better spent studying and practicing code. So if that's your situation, I would suggest either a code camp, an in-person coding camp such as Dev Mountain, or just doing stuff online with Free Code Camp or videos like mine here on YouTube. Now I have 2 more resource suggestions for you guys. The first is Cracking the Coding Interview. This is a book that's going to teach you how to succeed at a technical interview. A lot of the technical interviews for the big companies and the hard, challenging companies to get into, like Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, and all those, they have a very hard technical interview that requires knowledge on data structures, optimizations, and algorithms. This book will give you everything you need to know to succeed at one of those. The other resource that I'll suggest is similar in nature to learning how to succeed at a technical interview, but it's more practical, more hands-on, and that is Pramp. Again, Pramp has sponsored some of my videos prior to this one, but this is not a sponsored video for Pramp. I would highly recommend Pramp. I personally used it to prepare for a technical interview, which I did good on. It's basically going to pair you with another individual and help you practice technical problems. So you're going to get asked a question and then you're going to ask the other person a question. It's a tremendous way to practice your interviewing skills. Highly recommended. So those are all of the things I have to say about resources and mindset. Now we're going to be talking about what you actually need to know when it comes to studying a programming language. And I broke this up into 10 pieces. Very simple, and most of my tutorial series here on YouTube will go over these content. So that's what I would recommend, but yeah. All right, let's talk about those things. What do you need to know for a programming language? First thing we should probably talk about is what language to learn. Well, this usually depends on what your goals are. If you have absolutely no idea what language to learn or what you want to do, then I would recommend JavaScript. I have a series on that. Like I said, links in the description, but usually you're going to have some kind of goal in mind. The reason I recommend JavaScript is because a lot of the jobs in the industry, a lot of the things you're going to be needing to do with code is building websites. And JavaScript is a huge piece of building websites. But usually, if you're going to be building websites, you might have an idea of what you're trying to do. Maybe you're trying to get into web development, maybe you're trying to start your own company, and you'll have an idea that, hey, maybe I should learn JavaScript. But there are other options if there's other things you want to do. So for example, if you want to build video games, then I would recommend C++. Usually I would recommend C++ over C. So if you're considering learning C, then maybe just learn C++. The other two that I mentioned were C# and Java. And these are good general purpose programming languages. So if you're not entirely sure which language to go with, these would certainly not hurt. Now there is another one which I haven't done video series on yet, but I'm hoping to in the future, and that is Python. This would be a great one to do if you're looking to do some data analytics, for example. It's very popular for statistics, machine learning, and so forth. So that'll give you a general idea of which one to pick. C++ is very low level. It's very able to be optimized, very good for video games and desktop software that needs to be very fast. C# and Java is more like managed. It's easier to use. It's easier to program with. Not necessarily as optimized, but still very good. JavaScript is great for the web browser and Node.js for server side. And this would be a good language to learn for web development and mobile application development if you want to do something like React. React Native will allow you to deploy to iOS and Android. But you can do that with a lot of these different programming languages, so don't feel like you have to choose a certain one for a certain output. So there are about 10 pieces you should know about when it comes to learning a programming language. The first is the Hello World application. Now this is basically getting the application set up, started, and write some code to write to the console that says Hello World, or it shows up on the web browser, whatever it is. All it says is Hello World. And the reason you do this is to make sure you have your development environment set up. So this is basically step one. Once you got the Hello World running, you can start building more complex applications. So there's really nothing to number one. It's not learning how to code. It's all about setup. It's the most boring part of all of it. But once you get your first application written and you run it and it says Hello World, it's a very satisfying feeling. You feel like you created your first program because you did. Step number two is once you figure out how to create the Hello World and launch your first application, then you can start worrying about making dynamic applications using user input and doing things dynamically. So like asking the user for their name and saying, "Hello, Caleb." Making dynamic applications, that's step two. So learning how to get input, usually from the console if you're just starting out, but you could also get it from forms. If you're building websites, for example, you get it from a website form. However you want to do it, basically you need to figure out how to get information from the user and how to do stuff with that information. This is the part where you're going to learn a little bit about variables, because you're going to need to store that information you get from the user. So this is where you first start using variables. Part three, so the next thing you need to do is learning data types. So usually variables are going to have data types, and it's very helpful to learn the data types that are available for a particular language. So for example, you might have int, you might have double, you might have float, you might have string. Basically, data is organized into various types, and it's usually a pretty big section. So step 3, learning the data types, can take some time. It's very dry, it's very boring, it's like studying the different shapes of Legos. Like, you don't actually do anything with the Legos, you're just learning the different shapes, and then later on you can put those shapes together to build things. But at first it's pretty darn boring, I'm not gonna lie. The 4th is operators. Operators do things with data. So you have some data over here, you have some data over here, maybe you consider it 2 Legos. Well, putting those Legos together, that is considered an operation, and this is done with operators. So this is the part where you learn a little bit about arithmetic operators such as plus, minus, multiplication, division, and modulus. You also learn a little bit about logical operators and comparison operators. All these things that make building complex applications possible. Once you got the operators down, you can start making applications that branch. So maybe you ask the user what their name is or what their age is, and you can do different things based on their answer. This is made possible with operators and what's known as control flow. Control flow consists of various structures that allow us to branch and a loop in our application. So this is where you learn about the if statement, the switch statement, the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. 5 essential pieces to building complex applications. Now at this point, after you learn all that stuff, you should have a pretty good understanding of the basics of programming. You should start making simple applications, and it shouldn't be too difficult. This is where you can take another break and go back to data types and learn the complex data types. So this is where we talk about arrays, lists, multi-dimensional arrays. Maybe you go over queues and stacks, or even linked lists or some other complex data structures. Again, I generally find data types and data structures pretty boring, but maybe this is where you'll find interest in them because you get to do some more exciting work with these data structures. So that's number 6, complex data types and data structures. Then we take a break from that and go to functions. Functions are essential in programming, and this is one of the biggest pieces that you definitely want to make sure you understand. Don't disregard functions because they're going to be used in every single programming language and all the time. Functions basically allow you to extract a section of code, give it a name, and then you can just call that section of code using that name, maybe pass some data to it, and get some data back. Very simple concept in nature, but lots of details go with functions because there's parameters, there's arguments, there's return types, there's overloading, there's functions and methods, lots of information, but going through any of these programming series, you should get a pretty good foundation on functions. Once you got functions down, you should have a pretty good solid foundation, and you can start going into the more complex stuff, specifically object-oriented programming. This is like so important. I would recommend not going into object-oriented programming until you have a pretty good understanding of the previous 7 things I've mentioned. But once you got those down, object-oriented programming should become your lifeblood. Like, you live, breathe, eat, and sleep object-oriented programming. This is where you learn about classes, you learn about objects, you learn about properties, you learn about methods, you learn about constructors, destructors. Lots and lots of information comes with classes and object-oriented programming, but it's so vital. And specifically, there are 3 important pieces of object-oriented programming you should understand. That's polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. So that's number 8. Number 9 is reading and writing to disk. This is where you spend some time learning how to read from text files, how to write to text files, how to use configuration files, and even databases. So how you would write to a database and read from a database, learn a little bit about SQL and NoSQL and how to store information in a database. Very, very important. You guys know I'm very data centric on this channel. I have lots of series over databases. And then number 10 is to build a project. You take everything you learned, start building your own project. That's usually left up to you. You can build whatever you want. If you want to build a to-do list, if you want to build a... I got nothing. If you want to build a game or an iPhone app, this is that part where you take all this knowledge and put it to use. Here is where everything comes together because you're going to have to learn about data validation, making sure users put the correct information in. You're going to have to learn about security. You're going to have to learn about deployment. You're going to have to learn a lot of stuff to deploy your actual first application. This is probably one of the most important pieces because it really wraps everything together. So in review, the 10 sections that I think you guys should study is 1, the hello world, how to set everything up. 2, input and output. which is where you make dynamic programs and start working with variables. 3 is data types. 4 is operators. 5 is control flow. 6 is complex data types and data structures. 7 is functions. 8 is object-oriented programming. 9 is reading and writing to disk. And then 10 is taking all that information and building your own project. Very overwhelming, I know, but if you go through that, write down all those steps and start researching them one at a time, you'll have a pretty darn good understanding of whatever programming language you choose. And notice how I didn't say anything about a specific programming language in that list. This information can be taken and used for any of those programming languages, and you will learn the same material. It might be a little bit different from language to language, but no time will be wasted if you use this as your framework to studying a programming language. If you learn about functions inside of JavaScript, it's very similar to functions inside of C# and so forth. There are going to be some differences, especially between JavaScript and some of the other languages, but it's still programming and it's still skills you're going to develop. The more you learn now, the more it's going to help you later. So I highly recommend you pick one of the languages and don't worry about it. Just go learn the material, and once you got it down, if you realize you're not in the best language, switch to something else. It's less about the language and more about solving real-world problems and building software. It's lots of fun. If you guys have never coded before, then why are you still watching this video? Go watch one of my programming tutorials and learn how to code. Now, when it comes to taking the knowledge you learn and solidifying it, the #1 way I recommend this is to share it with other people. That's why I started my YouTube channel. That's why I create videos on here, because I personally don't feel like I understand something until I can take it and explain it to someone else. And the ways you can do that is totally up to you, but this is where a sponsor comes in, MailerLite. What I would recommend starting out with is do a monthly newsletter where you're basically documenting your experience of coding and what you're learning, and then start sharing that with your friends. Share it with the people you go to school with, or share it with your coworkers. Share it on a YouTube channel. Once you start building this mailing list, you can use it as a way to share knowledge, solidify your knowledge, and start building a following and a community around it. And at some point, maybe you'll even be able to turn it into a business. That's what I'm doing here, making videos about the content I'm learning. Newsletters are a very powerful way to connect with other people and start building a community. So I'd highly recommend MailerLite. Again, I'll leave a link for you guys in the description. On top of that, everything you do to share your knowledge with coding is huge resume brownies. I think literally every job I've ever had, I only got it because I was like, dude, check out my YouTube videos. Pretty much, yeah. So definitely recommend figuring out some way to share your information with other people. If it's not a newsletter, maybe a website, maybe a YouTube channel. Whatever it is, just do something. And with that, guys, that's all I have, and I'll see you guys in the next video.